We're going to take a look at using branding in 3D visualizations. And here I've got my Cinco de Mayo inspired decal that I want to put on my product. My product's going to be a range of coffees. The brand name is Toxicology, and the brand value statement says that this coffee is devilishly good. So I'm currently in Adobe Illustrator, and in order to make the assets that I create widely available to a number of different cloud platforms, I simply select it, and with the Libraries tab open, just up here, so you would flip from Properties to Libraries. I could then choose which library of all the different libraries that I have. If you're just starting out, more than likely you're going to have this one down near the bottom called My Library. That's the default. I've subsequently created a number of libraries, and this is the one that I'm going to use for branding and identity. And this is where I'm going to store everything that's relevant. So once you've got that open, you simply drag whatever assets you want into that library, and you see the plus circle indicating you're going to add or create content. And so that's all you need to do. And you can see it's already in there, and that will make it available for me when I flip into Adobe Dimensions. So in Adobe Dimension, we're welcomed here by a welcome screen, and it allows you access to a tour of the interface, see what others are creating, and an exploration of Adobe Stock, which is a stock asset library featuring 3D models, photographic images, as well as templates and a number of other things. So we're going to start by creating new, and of course I should show down here that there are access to tutorials down here. And you can also give feedback to the developing team and do surveys. So we create a new session, and this is what the session window looks like. And we have a starter plane here, and you can see the perspective lines, and we have our tool set over here. And we have really what's a properties area over here on the right, and camera controls up in this region here, as well as zoom factors. We start out by defaulting to the starter asset pile, and these are canned assets that come with the software. And you'll notice right now I'm filtering by models, and we have different filters here. But we'll notice right here in the models, there's quite a wide range. Now in any of these things, if you go to the bottom, you will see Browse Adobe Stock. And we'll do that just very quickly. And it'll take you out to Adobe Stock. And you can see that there's a filter within Stock right here. It's defaulted to 3D because that was the context in which we chose to go to the stock library. But as you can see, you have access to images, videos, templates, 3D, premium content, editorial, and so on. So you can extend your range by licensing these models. And you can see, given that it's December, there are some seasonal assets in there that might be relevant to some work that you happen to be doing. But there's a very broad range of models available. Now keep in mind, this is a marketplace, so it's quid pro quo. You can license images, but you can also license your own images, so it's give and take. So back into our software, and you can see you can also filter by materials. These are a number of materials that we can access that are already canned. I should add that you can access this through libraries as well, and we'll see that in a moment. So anything that you capture using Adobe Capture on your mobile device can also be accessed here and applied to any of your models. We have a number, excuse me, a number of lighting schemas for different types of studio lighting that can also be applied to your environment. Again, you could capture your own lighting themes, and in much the same way as you work with materials, you can also work with lighting schemes that you've captured. Images as well. Excuse me. We have a very small range of images here and some artwork, but what I should just remind you of, down near the bottom, you can access Adobe Stock, and in there you are able to access for free preview only images, and typically they'll be watermarked, but they're good in order to get you up and going. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to work with the models, and I want to bring in a coffee cup. So I'm just going to drag that in. It indicates placement. There's my coffee mug. And I'm going to look for the coffee bag as well. And you'll notice that immediately we can select and move these things relative to one another on our grid. And so always a good idea. You'll notice in the bottom cluster here, these are camera controls. So I'm going to use rotate, and you can see that we can rotate around the scene just to ensure that things aren't accidentally merged with one another. It's always a good idea to do what I call a flyby. You see how the cup is actually merged with the bag. And you might not get that from a perspective like this. So based on that, I'm just going to move the object out and away from the cup just to ensure that they're in their own separate space. And again, you can rotate this. Move the cup back, the bag back a little bit. Ensure that they're not on the same plane. You can bring it forward a little bit more. Tuck it behind the cup. Rotate the camera view again. And that's sort of the view that I'm looking for. Kind of like that. And again, we can pan up and down. There's a zoom out and zoom in feature. And as we'll see later, we can also adjust the horizon line to match the perspective of a background image that we're going to bring in and composite these elements against. So far, so good. So I'm going to first of all select the coffee bag. We'll have that selected, and now we can go to this area here and choose libraries. Now libraries gives me access to my own personal Creative Cloud libraries, and you can see these are a few materials that I've captured using Adobe Capture. I'm going to go into my branding and identity library, and you can see there's the brand that I want to apply to the bag. And it maps it onto that surface, and you'll notice if I move it around, it's moving it to the other surfaces of that model. Just to show you that, I'll rotate the camera perspective, and you can see it moving around like that. So I want to get back to it, move it. It's rotatable with this handle here, Command Z. We can scale it, holding the Shift key down, scales it in proportion. And of course we could distort it vertically or horizontally. Not recommended. So I want my branding to be pretty much where it is. I'm quite happy with that. And again, I want to add that same brand over here. So I select the cup, apply the branding to the cup, and position it. Again, you want to make sure that your branding is recognizable and readable from whatever perspective you're showing it from and on whatever object you happen to be placing it. Always try to show it to best advantage. This might mean some adjustments in terms of lighting and so on later on, and we'll see that as the demo progresses. So you can see, as we've got this cup selected, I just want to draw your attention here. We can back right out, and it breaks it down into environmental components, which is, general lighting schemes and background imagery, camera controls, and then the actual elements that are in the scene themselves, so our 3D assets. You'll notice that the coffee cup is in a folder here. If I click on it, it breaks it down into the individual components. I want to isolate the lid, and you'll notice that there's a little drill down here on the far corner, and if I click on it, it brings me into the material properties of that particular element of the model. And I can control things like its reflectance, making it look more metallic. I can actually give it a glow, and I can change its color. Given that it is the season, I'm going to go with a kind of seasonal color scheme. I'm going to make that red, and of course we know that the lids on these things are plastic, so we don't want a high degree of reflectance, but you know what? Because it's the season, I'm going to make this look like one of those Christmas balls you would get on a Christmas tree. So we'll do something really fancy. We've got a high reflectance, which gives us that metallic property. And then I'm just going to back out from the lid materials. This allows me to get back to the cup materials, and I could apply some color to that if I wished. Again, using the drill down right here, we're into the cup materials, and I could apply some base color. The other possibility is if I come back out here just to the cup level, there we go, and I've got, you can see layered on top of the cup we have the graphic, and below that we have the cup material. The other thing that we can do, if I go in here to starter assets, look at some of the imagery in there, I've got some, that's it. I've got some graphics in here, and I could apply that directly to that cup. So if I select the cup and then drag the dashes, you'll notice that I've applied that texture. Now, notice the layering here. It's just like in Photoshop and Illustrator. This is sitting on top of the decal. And you can see it play out here on the screen. So I want to make sure that the layering is appropriate. So I want the decal at the very top. And now I'm just going to stretch this, hold down the Shift key, and make sure that it spreads out across the entirety. Now, I made it rather large, and the reason is, if I go back to if I just go back to my tools, we are. And I rotate that camera. I want to make sure that it's properly stitched up the back. If I'd made it too small, there would have been a very large gap here in the rear. Now, if you're not seeing it, that's one thing. But if you were animating this eventually with some fly-throughs of your product, you wouldn't want to be flying through on this side and find a very unsightly gap in the artwork here. So you want to make sure that it's as closed up as can be. What I have noticed, we'll just rotate the cup so we can see this. So we use the rotate tool, rotate it to this axis. You can see that there's a discontinuity here at the back. And that's just an artifact. No matter how much I stretch that, we're still going to have that. So again, if I select the cup itself, click the drill down, select that graphic, I can make that much larger, again holding down the shift key, and now we'll rotate the camera again. You're going to notice that despite how large I make that work, we still have this artifact here at the back, kind of where it's zipped up at the back. Now, we can also scale things. It's going to rotate us back to where we want it. Rotate my cup back. Got to make sure I have the cup selected and not just the material. So we'll take that, rotate the cup back into position. There we have it. I just want to kind of change where we're at. Maybe zoom in a little bit more. There we go. All right, now we want to take a look at bringing in an appropriate background image. And at this point, we'll go back from the libraries to the starter assets. And this time we're going to go down to Browse Adobe Stock. I'll choose that. And what I want to find out here is if there's an image, you can see I've already got the search criteria in there, a cafe in Paris. And what I want to find is a picture of a table. There we have it in Paris. Maybe I'll use this one right here. Now, if I hover over this, I can save a preview, but I can specifically save it. You can see here if I'm logged in, I could actually save a preview. Try that again. Save a preview by clicking this little triangle. I can save it to a specific library, one of my libraries, rather than just having it default to my library. So I want it saved in branding and identity. And it's just saving a low resolution preview image just as a placeholder. If I wanted to, I could actually add it to my shopping cart, and then I would be able to license that. So right off the top, I can now go back in here to my libraries, and you can see that cafe image now appears up here in my branding and identity library. Now, I'm going to just make sure I don't have my cup selected. I'm just going to click on the background. So now, if I click that, you can see that it drops that in. Now, of course, we have a bit of a discontinuity here in terms of lighting and perspective and scale. And so these are things that we need to adjust. Very quickly, we can use this under the Actions button. So now we're in the Environment cluster of functions. And with Match Image, it does an analysis of the image, and it will resize elements and tried to match everything in there. Strangely, it didn't try to match the sunlight in there. So we click OK, and what it does is it analyzes the perspective in that scene and the lighting, and then it tries to make our models consistent with that. Now, at any time, I can start to move these models to put them into the scene, as it were. And so I should find that in this case, we need to scale that down a little bit. And so that it's within the realm of plausibility. And again, just move that back in my scene. So move it back there. And again, same thing with the coffee cup. And scale being an issue here, we're going to have to scale it down relative to the coffee bag. And you'll notice that the lighting is looking a little bit problematic here. I want to rotate the camera just so we can see. Okay, you can see the models. Now the background doesn't rotate because it's static, it's two-dimensional. But my models are separated in space. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we can manage down here, we can manage the horizon line ourselves to match that of the table. We can even tilt that horizon line if it was necessary. But I think things are looking pretty good the way they are right now. The only thing I might want to do is we're just going to zoom it out a little bit. Now, we've got these composited in the scene. It looks like they have the right perspective, but very difficult to see. So this probably is not the best choice in terms of showing the branding to its best advantage. The objects themselves are too small relative to the entire image, so we don't have a sense of intimacy. We can't see the detail. Also, lighting is a bit of an issue. It seems to be very, very diffuse lighting, probably hanging in some shadow there, so we need to artificially bump that up. And if we go to environment, you can see that we have the environmental light, and it's deriving its lighting from the image. You can just see here the image reference that it's using is that cafe. Basically, this seen through a mirror ball. Now, I can increase the intensity of that light, so it's like us pushing the ambient light in the image. So I've really boosted that up so that we can see the branding a little bit better. I can also rotate the direction of that light, and you can see, judging from the tables, there's a hot point, and if I were to match that hot point on the brass area of the tables, I would put it right about here. The intensity is perhaps a little too much, but I quite like that, right about there. Now, if your lighting had a very strong color quality, like there were colored lights in the environment, you could actually colorize those elements as well. You can see I'm just adding an intense red in there, which makes no sense whatsoever. So I'm just going to switch that off. The other thing is adding in sunlight. So this allows me to put in some directional qualities of light. You can see right away what a difference that makes. And I can really punch it. You've got to be careful though, because the luminance of the objects can't exceed the luminance of the objects around them. Now we could assume that even in a studio setup, we would put in some little kicker lights directly onto the objects to help make them stand out. And so in a sense, that's kind of what we're doing here as well. I'm just going to punch that a little bit, being careful not to punch it too much. And then cloudiness affects shadow. The cloudier we make it, the more dissipated the shadow is, the less cloudy it is, the sharper the shadow. And that holds true in life as well as in here. Another interesting thing is, again, we can control the angle of the lighting, and you can see the shadows being affected by that. And I'm going to go with this. You can see I'm putting the light just slightly behind, just like that. And the final thing is the height. This puts the sun up higher in the sky or lower down. Sort of in the evening or the early morning, we would have a very low trajectory of the sun. But if I make it too low, I don't know if you can see, but the shadows are extending over to the other coffee table. And so we've got to be aware of that, because we could create these shadow artifacts that give away the fact that our objects are actually sitting on a 2D image. So I'm going to use that as the height. Perhaps just adjust that intensity. And I think that's good. Now, once you've got it set in place, again, I would say that this is not the best. Perhaps this image, if it were cropped and it were much closer up, this would give me better results in terms of really bringing the brand into the face of the viewer. So perhaps there's another image that would make more sense. To give you an example of that, I'm just going to completely change the context. We're now in a bar scenario, and instead of these objects, I'm just going to select them. And remove them. And now our brand is going to be on a beverage. And so again, we will go back to starter assets, into models, and there's a beverage can with condensation. So I can drop this beverage can in here. I'm just going to scale that up. So I'll use a scaling tool. So this beverage is going to be sitting right on the edge of this bar. And again, like everything else, we can colorize even the pull ring. So if we were to rotate the camera perspective, just so we could see that pull ring temporarily, and select the pull ring, and we could give the pull ring, it's metallic obviously, we could choose its material. And we have a number of different materials here. The material would be not metal, but aluminum, which is down here somewhere. There it is, aluminum. So we've added aluminum. We can also change the base color for that pull tab. I could make it red. You can see we have red aluminum now, anodized aluminum. So this is a very special beverage. I'm just going to rotate that back, and I'm just going to go back to the scene. With that can selected, you'll notice under the Actions menu, there's a thing here that says Move to Ground. The problem is that the ground doesn't match the scene. So again, I could probably go back and say match the image. It'll analyze the image, and it drops it right down into place. Now you'll notice that it's automatically changed the lighting scheme, and so that would be up to me to change some of that ramp up the intensity of the environmental images, rotate where that light's coming from. There seems to be a very strong source of light just to the left. I can bring in the intensity of the sunlight, and again change the rotation on that to be consistent. That looks to be about it right there. And again, I could colorize it, but it's automatically analyzed it, and it's used the surrounding imagery to automatically give it a warm glow. So I'm just going to leave the settings that it's given, but know that you could colorize the light right here. Again, I can adjust the height of that light. So you'll notice how the shadow will change relative to that. So I bring it up, make it fairly high. There you have it. Change the rotation slightly. There we go. And again, you can see here with cloudiness, when it's less cloudy, the shadow is very sharp. So I would keep a sharp shadow on that. Again, if your light source was very far away, it would be less sharp as well. Okay, so now I'm ready to add my artwork. Again, back to libraries, locate my branding, and I've got another version of it over here. And I drop that artwork on. And I can position it, scale it. So this is another version of my branding for a beverage. And again, you can see if I break this down and we look at the can again, we can actually look at the liquid and go to the materials used in that liquid. So if we go to starter assets and we go to materials, the second one in here, sorry, materials, and there's actually one for beer. And I can apply that. So rather than it being water condensation, this is actually beer. Now, you notice that it's colorized appropriately and it sets out parameters for it. You could make that glow a little bit more, perhaps. You've got to be careful with some of these settings because if you push them too much, they give you this ethereal, unreal quality to the rendering of the artwork. So you start to signal to the audience that this composition isn't actually real. But I suppose the watermark in the background would give that away for them. That said, it's always good to try and experiment with some of these settings like glow, translucence settings, interior colors, and so on and so forth, just to see how they behave. Once you've got your composition done, you go to the rendering phase. And give it a name. Choose a rendering quality. I'm just going to use medium in this case. If you use a very high resolution, you've got a lot of artwork and a lot of objects, the rendering time can be, it can be substantial. And again, that's contingent on how much memory you have, what sort of graphics card, and so on. As far as export formats are concerned, you can output to Photoshop and as a PNG. So with Photoshop, it would retain all your layering, of course, and you can do that in 16 or 32 bits per channel. But for our purposes, we're just going to output a PNG. You could do both simultaneously. We could then choose a location. I'm just going to use my desktop, and then you render. And you'll notice down here, it's doing an estimation of the render time. And you can see the model starting to materialize with each successive pass in the rendering process. So we'll just wait for that to finish rendering, and we'll take it from there. The rendering's now finished, and you can see here, this is the final render. I think maybe I put a little too much glow on the beer here. It's starting to look like spray foam installation. So again, it's one of those things when you're experimenting with the properties of the materials, with things like translucence and glow. It's good to do a number of tests just to see exactly what the end result's going to be. You can see a little bit of dithering here in the shadow. And again, this was a medium quality. The high quality, we would get a more accurate rendition of that shadow boundary. So that's the PNG. The other part is sharing the model in a 3D web page viewable format. And if we go here to share and publish 3D scene, we can give it a name. We can create a link for it, and it then publishes that in a viewable 3D format for web. This process doesn't take a long time at all, and once it's published, it's going to generate a public link. You can copy that link, and then you can share that link or post it as an assignment, whatever. You can just go straight and view it on the web. It just starts rendering that model, and you'll notice that you can start to make that spin around. Now again, the background is static because it's two-dimensional, but the model can be studied from all angles just by clicking and dragging. I feel like a Wingardium Leviosa spell is coming on here for some reason. Anyway, that's the 3D viewable model for web. And that concludes the demo on branding in 3D using Adobe Dimension.